A show about a suicidal man after his wife's cancer death. Season 2 coming soon. So in the end, obviously, he didn't kill himself. Just like Jeffrey Epstein. I know he's your friend, but that doesn't matter to me.
Did you care about the lives of the underage women of age at the moment you got involved in the behavior?
Why does his case still spark controversy, even to this day? What is actually known about his mysterious death? Who are the powerful figures that are under scrutiny by the justice system because of their dealings with him? That's what we're going to talk about in this report about that and many other things. For many years, he was a financial magnate with great influence in various areas. Many politicians did not hesitate to shake hands with him, and for decades, hundreds of institutions thanked him for his immeasurable donations. His hectic social life also led him to spend late nights with the most renowned artists and businessmen. He managed to charm everyone with his charisma, his big smile, and a gaze full of confidence and pride. He was not only the trusted man of big shots, he also built a reputation as a philanthropist that earned him several mentions and compliments. There were even professionals who went so far as to call him a pioneer of science, always willing to invest in the most innovative projects. He caught the attention of many, however, when he began to promote the idea of improving the human race with his DNA. It was discovered much later that he planned to turn his New Mexico compound into a baby ranch where more than 20 women could be inseminated by him. But those wouldn't be his only secrets. There was a key moment in 2008 that made most of the contacts in his crowded address book suddenly decide to delete his phone number. Or they made the records that linked them to him disappear. Less than a decade later, with the accusations of pedophilia and child trafficking, things only got worse and worse. On August 10, 2019, there was a great commotion at the Metropolitan Correctional Center in New York, and it was no wonder. There's always a scandal when an inmate is found dead in their cell. The scandal grows even bigger when the suicide isn't entirely clear and has certain details that make it suspicious. It becomes even more scandalous if that suspicious suicide was committed by a public figure. And the truth is, at that time, Jeffrey Epstein was on everyone's lips. The media never got tired of bringing up scandalous details from his biography, and people consumed the story with a mix of outrage and curiosity. When the man's death became public, alarms went off, and not just for conspiracy theory addicts. Many investigators couldn't help but state what was obvious. That death was just too convenient, so much so that it was impossible not to admit that with it, an investigation that could have put many people behind bars fell apart. Powerful people, people who are elected to hold public office, people who appear on television every day, people who pull the strings of the brands that are at the very top. Epstein was not only facing up to 45 years in prison, he was about to face a trial where he would be pressured to expose all those he had helped over the years. With the darkness of the business he ran behind the scenes, the 66-year-old tycoon was found with a sheet wrapped around his neck. The official cause was asphyxiation. The verdict was repeated by everyone from the medical examiner to the former attorney general, who claimed to have reviewed it. Security cameras clearly showed that no one had entered the businessman's cell. Time and again, the version was confirmed by everyone connected to the incident. However, the story was questioned due to the death's convenience for those potentially involved and a series of other factors. One of his lawyers, Ray Wingarden, said that he had met Epstein and had not seen a desperate or dejected person. He also argued that the businessman's body showed bruises and injuries, more consistent with an induced death than with a suicide. Prison psychologists also testified under oath that Epstein was mentally healthy and did not appear to have self-destructive tendencies. On the other hand, according to documents from the Bureau of Prisons reviewed by the New York Times, the man had declared himself too cowardly to even think about hurting himself. And there's another important factor in this whole matter, a really important factor, a factor that can be used to defend any of your positions. Weeks before he was found dead, Epstein had already had to be taken to the hospital ward. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. To better understand the details of this case and why Jeffrey Epstein had so many enemies, it's necessary to start from the beginning. Pauline and Seymour G. Epstein, both Jewish, got married in 1952, and just a year later, while they were living in Brooklyn, they had a boy whom they named Jeffrey Edward Epstein. The Epsteins were a rather humble family. Pauline worked as a school aide and homemaker, and Seymour took care of recreational spaces in New York. A somewhat long and pretentious title to announce that he was a gardener. Jeffrey and his younger brother grew up spending a lot of time on the streets and attending public schools that gave them the chance to mingle with kids who really had far fewer opportunities than they did, and others whose parents had already managed to make the long-awaited leap that had lifted them out of the middle class. At that time, little Epstein showed his ability to get along well with everyone. He had an undeniable gift for getting along with anyone. He had a natural ability for leadership and a clear hint of manipulation. But it wasn't these things that made him stand out in his early years. At just 5 years old, Jeffrey had already learned to play the piano, and everyone in his inner circle predicted a fruitful career surrounded by sheet music and instruments. The prophecy seemed on its way to being fulfilled when, at 15, the teenager enrolled in the National Music Camp. There he excelled, and some optimists even said they were witnessing a prodigy. However, something happened around that time, and the life devoted to music that everyone had imagined for him, suddenly it vanished, as if it had never been more than a mirage. At just under 20 years old, Jeffrey decided to devote himself to mathematics. By 1974, he left his new university without obtaining a degree. To outsiders, the young man had lost his way, but his inscrutable face gave no sign that anything was wrong. Jeffrey seemed to have a plan, and sooner rather than later, he would make it clear that nothing and no one could stop him. Despite not having credentials or qualifying degrees, and perhaps only thanks to his enormous power of persuasion, Epstein began working in September 1974 as a physics and mathematics teacher for teenagers at the prestigious Dalton School. He stayed there for 2 years, during which no one asked him for any explanations. In 1976 he left. Some rumors say that he had inappropriate dealings with some students. Others claim that he was forced to leave for fear that it would be discovered that he was not qualified to be in front of a class. One way or another, Jeffrey joined Bert Stearns as a low-level junior assistant to a floor trader. Bert Stearns. It was a global investment bank that was active until 2008 when the financial crisis caused it to be absorbed by other banks. Jeffrey not only felt comfortable with his new job, but he soon proved that he was born for that kind of business. His rise was meteoric, and before he knew it, he was advising the wealthiest clients. Even his bosses were surprised to see his ability to solve complex problems. They also didn't miss Jeffrey's ability to get along with people who were usually paranoid and unfriendly. His work was so impressive that just 4 years after joining Bert Stearns, he was made a partner at the firm. And that was just the beginning. Just when he was at the peak of his career, another unclear situation forced him to change jobs again. Unlike before, Epstein now knew his path. His ambition drew him to Wall Street. And once again, he didn't hesitate when it came to speaking as an equal with people whose sums of money had many zeros. Not much is known about Epstein's methods, but it is known that on more than one occasion, his moral conduct put him between a rock and a hard place. He became agile at slipping out of trouble, while perfecting his already astonishing boldness to convince others to do what he said. For some, he was almost like a magician. Others saw him as someone far too unscrupulous. He was probably a bit of both, but above all, he was effective, and everyone ended up charmed by him. One of his consulting firms was dedicated exclusively to clients with fortunes greater than $1 billion. When he began to manage and handle the fortune of ex-Wexner, he finally established himself. Wexner was the owner of a company that contained other large-scale companies within it. Until Epstein came into his life, the man rarely allowed himself to be advised. Then, everything would change. Epstein was so involved in Wexner's business that people started calling him the boyfriend of the great businessman. They worked together until 2008. That year, Epstein would face his first accusation, which would shake his empire. And we're getting closer to that event. But before that, it's important to mention another characteristic of Jeffrey. He was very good at organizing parties. Jeffrey Epstein started to frequent different circles of powerful and influential people more and more often. He used to brag about his houses, his mansion, and his estate, but when he really wanted to impress someone, he would talk about his island. Yes, Jeffrey had his own island. He liked to call it Little St. Jeff, and it was a private paradise. 75 acres in the United States Virgin Islands. The Virgin Islands were bought from Denmark by the United States government at the height of World War I to prevent them from being used as a base for German submarines. Today, it's a double paradise because of its palm trees and reefs. And also because of its tax status, which allows big investors to move their money there and avoid high taxes. For example, Epstein bought the island in 1998 and set up his shell companies there. In short, by moving to the Virgin Islands, Epstein was able to reduce his federal income taxes by 90%. You don't have to be a math genius to know that the deal he made was perfect. Starting in 2007, Epstein began a massive construction and remodeling program that raised suspicions among local officials. In just a few months, the main building almost doubled in size. Satellite photos show an extensive network of terraces, cabins, beach houses, swimming pools, docks, utility buildings, a helipad, a tennis court, bleachers, a kind of lake, and several cabins. At the other end of Epstein's mansion, there is a square structure with blue and white stripes, often referred to as a temple, surrounded by a terrace with a red labyrinth design. It used to have a golden dome and 2 gold statues on its roof, which according to reports were ripped off by Hurricane Maria. But was it a place where Epstein meditated? Did he go there to perform rituals as many believed and claimed? Did he perhaps worship some strange deity? Well, the truth is that it was never really possible to verify what actually happened there. Yes, it is known that on the island the man organized lavish parties attended by influential politicians, CEOs of the world's most solid companies, actors, actresses, models, and various celebrities. For the paparazzi, being able to get a snapshot of those massive celebrations was considered the equivalent of stumbling upon the Holy Grail. It was also synonymous with danger. It was well known that crossing the fence Epstein had put up around his property and his private life was not a path you could take without running a great risk. No one really knew what happened on that island, but there was an aura of secrecy that only fueled the worst suspicions. Were those people protecting themselves from prying eyes to preserve their own privacy? Or was there something more? We're going to investigate the terrible answer to that question in just a few minutes. However, before we reach the climax, we have to finish understanding the extent of Epstein's power. And for that, there's nothing better than highlighting a very important fact. The businessman also boasted about financing several media outlets that covered cultural and artistic events. What do we want to highlight with this? Epstein was a shaper of opinion and promised young talents a place at the top if they appeared in his magazines. To put it another way, Epstein was a facilitator of fame. But what did someone who already had everything ask for in return? Well, nothing. Or at least nothing directly. Epstein had an advisor who was in charge of closing the nefarious deals for him. Her name is Ghislaine Maxwell, and she is the second monster we need to know in order to fully understand this story. Ghislaine was born on Christmas in 1961 and always had a comfortable economic life. Her family lived in a large castle in Oxford, which had no less than 53 rooms. All thanks to Ghislaine's father, Robert, who was very skilled in business. To illustrate this, it's enough to say that the mansion where they spent their days had been acquired at a very low cost. Since the place had historical significance for the city, Robert never missed an opportunity. The man was born in former Czechoslovakia. He had distinguished himself in the war, and after being an editor and a member of the English Parliament, he became a media mogul. Through this, he greatly influenced European social life, and the arrival of his first daughter marked a significant change in him. For a couple of reasons. 3 months after she was born, Ghislaine, another son of Robert, who was 15 years old, suffered a serious car accident and would spend 7 years in a coma until the day he died. The situation made Robert start to focus all his attention on the newborn, who over time would become Daddy's favorite. Something that, by the way, did not save her from receiving the verbal and physical abuse that the man inflicted on those closest to him. Robert, besides being good at business, had a rather aggressive personality. Ghislaine went to the most exclusive school in England, then to Oxford University. She studied literature and modern history, always showing off her great intelligence. She quickly gained recognition at major events with her numerous medals. She was a near public figure with a relaxed and fresh personality. It was rumored that Robert had pulled some strings and organized gatherings so she could meet one of the Kennedys, whom he hoped would become his son-in-law. However, the girl leaned toward other romantic interests. For a while, she dated Count Gianfranco Cicogne, an aristocrat who, like her, enjoyed long evenings filled with champagne. After the relationship ended, she decided to focus on her own business growth. Her father had bought the New York Daily News in 1991, and she was sent to Manhattan as the head of the project. Things were going well for her in the position. She had the skills and was a woman who knew how to earn respect, but one event turned everything upside down. On November 5th, 1991, Robert Maxwell disappeared from the deck of his yacht while sailing near the Canary Islands. Shortly after, he was found lifeless in the water. The death of Robert Maxwell remained shrouded in mystery. Ghislaine always maintained that her father had been murdered. Her siblings, on the other hand, never believed it. For them, it was either a suicide or an accident. The important thing is that after Maxwell's death, it was discovered that the tycoon had orchestrated a massive fraud to inflate the value of his assets and evade his tax obligations. The debts became enormous overnight, and the accusing finger of justice pointed at the privileged family. When she saw that 2 of her brothers were arrested, Ghislaine decided to move far away. That way, she would settle permanently in the United States. In the northern country, she worked as a real estate agent and kept a low profile, at least for a few months. Then, without any of her new contacts seeing it coming, she went from living in an apartment to living in a 5-story mansion valued at $15 million. Immediately, she became the center of attention again at the cocktail parties held in the wealthiest buildings in Manhattan, and her prestige returned to its peak, which she had been forced to abandon after her father's death. And how did she manage to recover so quickly? The answer has 2 words. Jeffrey Epstein. Yes. Ghislaine began a romantic relationship with the businessman which lasted for years before ending. They were photographed together during this time. However, by that time, both she and he had discovered that they made a good team, so they continued being partners. Gradually, Ghislaine became an assistant, confidant, general manager. She was the one who fixed problems and provided solutions when situations got complicated. She also organized Epstein's houses and the staff. She gave each new employee a 58-page manual with instructions on how they should behave and made them sign a confidentiality agreement. And as if all this wasn't enough, she was also the one who brought underage girls to Epstein's house. In 2005, a woman called the Palm Beach police to make a serious accusation. She reported that her 14-year-old stepdaughter received $300 for giving a massage to a man around 50 years old in a large mansion. The police took note of the case. According to the testimony, the minor had been forced to take off her clothes and had received a sexual proposition. When the officers asked for the address of the home where the abuse had taken place, they were astonished. That address was known by everyone. It was the address of the biggest house you could see in the area and in many surrounding areas. It was the house of the billionaire Jeffrey Epstein. Knowing that someone like Epstein had a large group of lawyers, probably the best in the country, they proceeded to act with caution so that the subject, if guilty, would not find a quick way to get away with it. The months-long investigation involved gathering testimonies and tracking entries and exits from the house in question. A fine job of espionage was done, trash was rummaged through, and there were lookouts stationed 24 hours a day. The results, a real nightmare. It didn't take them long to discover that what had been reported was just the tip of the iceberg. Epstein's house was constantly visited by teenagers. When one left, another would come in. The modus operandi was always the same. The girls were brought to the place with the promise that they would receive money for giving Epstein massages. In the middle of the session, the man would offer to double the payment in exchange for an intimate encounter. It is important to clarify that Epstein was fully aware at all times that most of the girls who entered his home were minors, and many of them came from humble families. After having relations with the girls, they were offered more money to bring in a new victim, thus perpetuating a chain of terrible exploitation. While investigating the situation, the police discovered that Epstein had already been found guilty of paying minors to give him massages at his Palm Beach mansion. They had evidence, testimonies from more than 40 girls, and a long history of prior incidents. Epstein was completely cornered. Of course, they didn't count on the fact that money can not only buy good lawyers, but also outright impunity. Faced with the irrefutable evidence, a judge granted a search warrant for Epstein's house. Thanks to the accounts, particularly consistent ones from the victims, they had a general idea of the layout of the place. They knew where to look for incriminating evidence. Unlike what they expected, no one was alarmed by their presence, and no one objected to them entering the house. Also, unlike what they expected, they didn't find anything there, absolutely nothing. It was so much like this that the situation quickly became suspicious. There were computers missing from the property, the security videos had been erased, everything was spotless in every corner. The officers immediately gave their verdict. Someone on the inside had tipped off Epstein about the raid, and he had taken care of cleaning up. Despite evidence supporting the hypothesis, the prosecutor chose not to continue investigating. Had all those months of investigation been in vain? The idea infuriated the chief of police of Palm Beach, who decided to double down and presented everything collected so far to the FBI. The FBI got involved in the matter and even managed to revive complaints that were more than 7 years old. In response to this, Epstein used his power of coercion and made sure to show that his team was afraid of nothing and no one. Investigators and whistleblowers were blackmailed or found themselves in uncomfortable situations that could easily be interpreted as subtle threats. Even so, the desire for justice made the prosecution remain firm in their position that the matter deserved to be taken to trial. They even gained the support of a part of the press, which echoed what was happening. And now, Jeffrey had nowhere to escape, and the voices of more than 36 victims would finally be heard. But then the unthinkable. The Attorney General of Florida, Alexander Acosta, allowed Epstein to reach a deal, a very particular deal. It was even said that in the history of the American judicial system, no defendant ever got such a favorable deal. Epstein pleaded guilty to the charge of soliciting prostitution and went from facing life imprisonment to negotiating a sentence of 18 months in prison. At the same time, he promised to voluntarily register as a sex offender and reach private and confidential monetary settlements with some of the victims. His accomplices were also granted immunity, with a controversial extension, including those mentioned in the case and those who are still unknown. Acosta was heavily criticized and later said that he offered a lenient plea deal, because they told him that Epstein belonged to intelligence and that he was above his pay grade. The victims were left with the sad consolation that at least the tycoon would spend a year and a half in prison, but it turns out that not even this was fulfilled. Starting from the third month of being locked up, Epstein earned the privilege of being able to leave to work at his luxurious offices for 12 hours, 6 days a week. He was in a separate pavilion with a television room, allowing unrestricted visitor access. In the 13th month, he was released for good behavior and was told he had to spend a year under house arrest. By that time, it surprised no one that he spent that year traveling all over the world without even hiding, making it clear that he had the power to put justice under his heel. June 18, 2010, Epstein's former house manager, Alfredo Rodriguez, was sentenced to 18 months in prison after being found guilty of one count of obstruction, for not handing over to the police a journal in which he had recorded Epstein's history. The FBI reviewed the material and agreed that it was information that would have been extremely useful for investigating and prosecuting the case, including names and contact information of witnesses, materials, and additional victims. After that, Epstein was not publicly condemned. No one from his circle distanced themselves from him, and only a few were cautious when it came to communicating with the man. The private island parties resumed, and the grinning businessman appeared on every television camera he encountered. Most journalists, instead of echoing that episode, which was a clear sign of a shameful performance by the justice system, preferred to go back to talking about the clothes the man wore or the women he was seen with. Systematically, all the families who asked for the man to be imprisoned were ignored until no one ever heard from them again. For almost a decade, impunity prevailed. However, from the shadows, a group of people kept gathering information. And what they discovered not only helped them to fight again against that seemingly untouchable being, but also left them stunned. Was Epstein perhaps worse than they already knew? Yes, much worse. On July 6, 2019, Epstein was arrested at Teterboro Airport in New Jersey on charges of sex trafficking. It was discovered that he not only abused minors, but also made them available to other similarly dark individuals. It was proven that at his famous party, underage girls paraded among the arms of the guests. That shed light on another great mystery that had kept everyone awake for years. How did Epstein manage to make even the strictest businessmen eager to work with him? There was the answer. He had provided special services to all of them. He had used other people's perversion to position himself at the center of power. He was the Lord of all secrets, the predator who fed the other predators. It wasn't that they respected him. Everyone feared him. Epstein knew too much. According to studies and sources, on the day of his arrest, about a dozen FBI agents forced the door of his house in Manhattan. There they found hundreds and possibly thousands of sexually suggestive photographs of women, either totally or partially nude. Some of the photos were confirmed to be of underage women. In a locked safe, they found compact discs full of erotic material and videos that implicated other members of the elite. The videos they used for blackmail. They also found in the safe a fraudulent Austrian passport that expired in 1987 which had Epstein's photo on it, but a different name. The passport had numerous entry and exit stamps and listed his place of residence as Saudi Arabia. According to his lawyers, Epstein had been advised to obtain the passport, because as a wealthy member of the Jewish faith, he was at risk of being kidnapped while traveling abroad. The new evidence gathered led to him being imprisoned at the Metropolitan Correctional Center in New York City. Even though he offered a $600 million bail, this time the judge was incorruptible. Epstein had finally been caught. The man spent most of his time in prison in a conference room with his lawyer and sometimes with psychologists. There he shared advice with his interlocutors on how to invest and mentioned his interest in physics and mathematics. A week after being detained, he was found beaten and unconscious on the floor of his cell. The accounts conflicted. Some said it was a failed suicide attempt, while others spoke of an attack by his cellmate, a former police officer accused of 4 homicides. He was placed under observation, and measures were taken to prevent something similar from happening again. even though he was supposed to be watched at all times. On the night of August 10, 2019, there was no one near him. That afternoon, he asked to call his mother but actually called his girlfriend. Then he returned to his cell, never to come out again. A few hours later, he was found hanged. And that's how our story returns to the beginning. Epstein's death triggered a rapid wave of speculation that quickly spread across the internet. The news was taken up as a banner by the increasingly influential QAnon conspiracy movement. This movement believes that a cabal of elite Democrats and media figures is conspiring to harm children. President Trump joined in these statements and linked the death to Bill Clinton, who had flown on Epstein's private jet. Like many politicians, and from entertainment. The ironic thing is that Trump himself was also on that plane on more than one occasion. Things didn't settle down when it was confirmed that the two security cameras pointing at Epstein's cell door weren't working. On the day of his death, the question spread: who could want to kill Epstein? Simple, many people, and one more powerful than the other. Justice went after Ghislaine Maxwell. The girl was on the run for several months until she was found in a mansion on the outskirts of New York. She was tried and sentenced to 20 years in prison. It was proven that she was the one who recruited underage girls for Epstein to abuse them. In an interview, Maxwell stated that she was constantly mistreated and that vital information for her trial was not given to her. Until it was too late. She considers her imprisonment to be unconstitutional and serves as a cover-up to try to close a case that still smells rotten. 2 days before he died, Epstein had made his will. There, he declared an estate of $600 million. The victims are currently taking action against that trust in order to collect their compensation. Epstein reportedly wanted his head and penis preserved after death. The wish was not fulfilled. At the time, the prosecutor who made the infamous deal with Epstein that got him out of prison was working as Donald Trump's Secretary of Labor in 2019. When the businessman's death revived all the scandals he had been involved in, he resigned from his position and tried to distance himself from public scrutiny. Prince Andrew, one of those accused of having benefited from Epstein's trafficking and pedophilia network, had to respond to the accusations, although his explanations convinced no one. His public image deteriorated and the justice system is still investigating. Jean-Luc Brunel, a French businessman and founder of a major modeling agency, was arrested and accused of being an accomplice in the crimes attributed to Epstein. The man was also found dead in his Paris cell, and the causes of his death are still under investigation. It is estimated that after so many raids and investigations, the authorities should have more certainty about the people who had turned to Epstein in search of minors. But, mysteriously or not, that list remains hidden. The only thing that is clear in this case is that there are still many secrets yet to come to light, and many people willing to make sure that doesn't happen. That concludes today's video on Jeffrey Epstein. I hope you enjoyed our discussion. If you did, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and enable notifications. Also, I remind you that there is a version for channel members, which you can watch by clicking the join button below, choosing membership number 2, and then going to the community tab. This way, your name will appear on the side. Thanks to all these members, we are able to make these kinds of videos, which are often demonetized and hidden from recommendations by YouTube. I invite you to leave your comment below with suggestions for possible future videos. I'll leave some videos for you to keep binge watching. With that, goodbye. My name is Magnus Mephisto and I'll see you in the next video. Goodbye.